Hello there, guys, and welcome back. Well done. In lesson one, you covered your why for getting married and hopefully have really nailed down the purpose for your marriage. Now, in this lesson, we're going to cover a couple of tools you can use to strengthen your relationship. So the first thing I want to cover with you is the tool of being able to tell the difference between facts and opinions on the subject of marriage. Now, oftentimes, we can have a tendency in life to ask people we know and we trust more than actual experts on any subject. Let's take, for instance, a weight loss program. If you were trying to lose weight, there would be a tendency, right, to ask your best friend what they think. But let's just say your best friend possibly also struggles with his or her weight loss and has never had a successful run of being on a diet or sticking to an exercise program. Obviously, they're likely to give you a lot more opinions than facts. So we want to focus our attention on looking for correct sources of information. For instance, in marriage, you probably wouldn't want to ask a single person for their advice on your marriage, and you wouldn't want to ask someone who had never helped anyone before. It's important to make smart decisions on the subject of marriage because this is something that's going to hopefully last the rest of your life. So let's dive into the definition, the difference between a fact and an opinion. A fact is something that can be shown to be true. It can be proven, right? An opinion is a kind of an idea which may or may not come from facts. So opinions are not always true, right? So let's take as an example, why should you ask me for advice on marriage? Well, if you know my story, you know that I've been divorced. So I've done it the wrong way. And I took the opportunity at that low point in my life to go study and research the mind and life and how marriage actually works. I've spent over a decade now helping couples to restore or strengthen their relationships. I've delivered over 1,000 hours of marriage coaching. I have lots and lots of testimonials you can find from couples who I have helped. And I also myself am a happily married woman. Ben and I just celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary. So as you can see, it's important to look at the difference between the facts that I'm going to be sharing with you, which are science-based and experience-based, and just the opinions of friends or family who love you and care about you, but may not actually have the enough experience or science to base their opinions upon. Now, one of the tools that I want to give you in this lesson, which, like I said, is absolutely based on my own personal experience, as well as the experience of thousands of hours of coaching, or 1,000 hours, I should say, of coaching with couples, is this. All relationships, to continue to exist, must be constantly created upon. So if you're going to have a relationship last beyond the first year of marriage, you have to be constantly creating on it. Let me give you some examples. Every single morning, I wake up to a hot cup of coffee or tea from my husband, right? Ben, every single morning, he gets up before I do, goes in the kitchen and makes me tea or coffee. And it is the most wonderful thing. But at the same time, if one day he just suddenly decided to stop doing that, eventually our relationship, I'm sure, would start to slip into what I call marriage autopilot. Okay. In reverse, I don't do the same thing for him every single day. I'm more creative and spontaneous. So I like to just pepper little surprises throughout his day or throughout the week. I'll text him in the morning and tell him I love him. I'll create date ideas, and then we do at least one date night every single week, even 5 years into our marriage, right? So I want you to pause here for a moment and think, what are the things I could be doing for him or her or them to actually expand upon and constantly be creating newly your relationship? All right. Now, I mentioned this thing called marriage autopilot. I want to talk about that for a minute and give you some real live examples where I have seen this. Let's talk about what marriage autopilot means. So autopilot is when you just kind of put something on automatic and you're no longer fully focusing on it or doing it consciously. We want to make your marriage something you constantly and consciously decide to create upon every single day. So when you put marriage on autopilot, it's actually the first step towards no longer having a relationship at all, right? That's really the first step in the direction of divorce. So that's obviously not the direction we want to go. So let me give you these examples. In example number one, Bethany, she's a grandmother, right? And here's where things went wrong for her and her husband is they actually hadn't done anything wrong. They had been happily married for decades. And the only problem was that her original purpose for marriage was she really, really, really wanted to have kids. He was a wonderful father. They had a wonderful life together. But then one day her last child flew the roof, right? He went off to college and they were suddenly empty nesters. And now she no longer had a real driving purpose for her marriage. There was no real other goal that she had created, right? And so things started to slip a little bit. They started to not have anything left to create upon together, and they started to grow apart. So this is something that can happen at any stage of marriage. It's really important that you understand that. And for Bethany and her husband, the solution was to actually start creating new goals together. Like, what do we want to do together that we couldn't do apart, right? Maybe it's retirement goals. Maybe it's the grandchildren, right? But they had to come up with new purpose and new, light a new fire underneath their relationship. Now, let's talk about Kirk. Kirk, his wife actually wanted to go to Africa and live in a yurt for a year. Kirk, on the other hand, was busy building his online business. So you see right there, the purposes that they had didn't quite align, and they had never really discussed that before they got married. They got married because they loved each other deeply and really enjoyed each other's company, but didn't really think about 5 or 10 or certainly not 30 or 50 years from now when they might have very divergent goals, right? So for them, getting them back on the same page was really more about getting them on the same page for the very first time. Marriage Autopilot had started because they were frustrated and didn't understand how to talk to each other about their goals. Now, Steffi, on the other hand, she and her husband were actually doing very, very well in their marriage up until the point when she realized she had an amazing skill, a talent that she'd never known about, and she suddenly wanted to become a mompreneur. So her and her husband and her 3 young kids, suddenly there wasn't time for everything anymore, right? There were certain things that she had agreed to do as the wife and as the mother, and her husband was working, and suddenly she didn't have time to do those things, be a mom, be a wife, and also be a mompreneur. And so rather than both sitting down and figuring it out and letting him know, look, my priorities have changed, I want to do this, and working it out together, right? Per that definition of marriage that we talked about in lesson number 1, where marriage has to be in support of both people's goals, and recognizing that people are individuals and sometimes our priorities and goals change, right? And being willing to grant that that's okay to your partner. So for them, it was simply a matter of sitting down and getting on the same page again and shifting around their priorities and their agreements on what was okay and what was not okay in the marriage, right? And then they were able to take that marriage off autopilot and actually start creating on their relationship again. So these are some really good examples of why marriage autopilot starts. But however it starts, the solution is to just start constantly creating on that relationship again and use the tools you're going to learn in this course to actually strip away anything that's getting in the way of that. All right, there's one other thing I wanted to squeeze into this lesson. So let's talk about indicators. An indicator is a sign. It's something that shows a change is occurring in the relationship. Good indicators might be things like suddenly the person wants to talk to you more, or feeling more impassioned and wanting to have sex, right? Better intimacy, better communication. Those are all good indicators. They mean that a positive change is happening in the marriage. Bad indicators are things like lessening eye contact, right? They don't want to meet your eyes anymore when they talk to you. Lack of communication, no time for romance, or decreased passion. Now, I want to talk about this thing called no time. This is a common excuse I hear from people is, oh, we don't really have time for date night, or we don't have time to constantly create. I don't have time every day to work on my marriage. The truth is, I hate to break it to you, and this is going to sound like tough love, but all human beings have the same 24 hours, right? It's only a matter of how we prioritize our time. So if the relationship is important to you, if you've really done lesson one and mapped out what the purpose of your marriage is, then it's actually a bad indicator. It's a bad sign that the person isn't able to find the time, because what it really means is that they're not prioritizing the marriage. So that's something, again, you'll learn more tools to help you handle in later lessons, all right? But for right now, what I want you to do is actually write down a list of the indicators that you already know about in your relationship. There's probably good indicators and bad indicators you already recognize. Maybe it's a look on their face or something they say when they're happy, sometimes something they say when they're not. And I want you to make that list because we're going to use that list in a later lesson. All right, guys, over to you.